The morning mist hung low over Pearl Harbor. As Seaman First Class James Miller adjusted his white cap and gazed across the tranquil waters of the Hawaiian Naval Base, it was Sunday, December 7th, 1941, and the Pacific Fleet lay anchored in neat rows like sleeping giants. The USS Arizona sat majestically among her sister battleships, her crew of over 1,400 men preparing for another peaceful day in paradise. Admiral Husband Kimmel stood on the balcony of his headquarters, sipping coffee and reviewing intelligence reports that seemed increasingly ominous. For months, diplomatic tensions between the United States and Japan had been escalating. The Japanese Empire, under Emperor Hirohito and led by Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, had been expanding aggressively throughout Southeast Asia. American economic sanctions had strangled Japan's oil imports, creating a powder keg that threatened to explode at any moment. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey was already at his desk in the Ford Island Command Center, meticulously organizing patrol schedules. The base maintained a routine surveillance pattern, but budget constraints and peacetime mentality had reduced their reconnaissance flights, unknown to Ramsey and his fellow officers. This gap in coverage would prove catastrophic within hours. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg aboard the USS Arizona conducted his morning inspection. With characteristic thoroughness, the 49-year-old naval veteran had served his country faithfully for over 2 decades, never imagining that this December morning would be his last. His ship, commissioned 26 years earlier, represented American naval power and technological superiority 360 miles north of Oahu. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he watched the final preparations for Operation Z. The Japanese strike force, consisting of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and numerous support vessels, had maintained radio silence for 12 days while crossing the treacherous North Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's audacious plan was about to unfold. According to historical accounts documented in Walter Lord's Day of Infamy, the Japanese had been planning this surprise attack for nearly a year, studying American naval patterns and identifying Pearl Harbor's vulnerabilities. Commander Minoru Genda had meticulously planned every detail of the assault, from the timing of the waves to the specific targets that would cripple America's Pacific Fleet. The morning air carried the scent of tropical flowers and diesel fuel. As sailors across the harbor went about their Sunday routines, many attended religious services, while others wrote letters home or played cards in their quarters. The base's anti-aircraft guns stood unmanned, their crews enjoying weekend liberty. Radar stations operated with skeleton crews, and the Army's mobile radar units had detected unusual aircraft formations approaching from the north but dismissed them as expected B-17 bombers. From the mainland. At 7:40 in the morning, Commander Mitsuo Fukuda led the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft toward their destiny. The Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, Aichi D-3 dive bombers, and Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters maintained perfect formation. As they approached the unsuspecting American naval base, Fukuda's famous words, "Tora, Tora, Tora," meaning tiger, 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 would soon echo through radio transmissions, signaling that complete surprise had been achieved. The tranquil Sunday morning was about to transform into one of the most devastating surprise attacks in military history, forever changing the course of World War II and America's destiny. At 7:48 in the morning, the peaceful Hawaiian sunrise exploded into chaos as Commander Mitsuo Fukuda's aircraft descended like metallic vultures upon the unsuspecting naval base. The first bombs struck Ford Island's seaplane ramp, sending geysers of concrete, steel, and seawater skyward. Within seconds, the tranquil Sunday morning dissolved into a nightmare of smoke, flame, and screaming metal. Seaman Miller, who had been admiring the peaceful harbor moments before, watched in stunned disbelief as Japanese dive bombers plummeted toward Battleship Row. The rising sun emblems on their wings became clearly visible as they pulled out of their devastating dives. His training kicked in as he sprinted toward his battle station, Dodging falling debris and the first casualties of America's entry into total war, the USS Oklahoma, moored outboard of the USS Maryland, took the first torpedo hit at 7:50. The massive explosion rocked the 31,000-ton battleship, and within minutes, 3 more torpedoes tore into her port side. Water rushed through the gaping wounds as Captain Howard Bode fought desperately to save his ship and crew. The Oklahoma began listing heavily to port, her fate sealed by the precision of the Japanese torpedo bombers. Admiral Kimmel rushed from his headquarters as the first explosions shattered the morning. Calm, he watched helplessly as his Pacific Fleet, the pride of American naval power, came under devastating attack. Anti-aircraft guns finally began responding. But the Japanese had achieved complete tactical surprise. The admiral's face reflected the grim realization that his naval career and America's peacetime era were ending simultaneously. Lieutenant Commander Ramsey immediately ordered general quarters throughout Ford Island, but many of the base's defensive systems were unmanned or inadequately prepared for combat. The Japanese had timed their attack perfectly, striking during the change of watch when many crews were either at breakfast or attending Sunday services. This timing maximized casualties and minimized defensive response. The USS West Virginia, commanded by Captain Mervyn Benyon, absorbed multiple torpedo hits that caused catastrophic flooding. Benyon, mortally wounded by shrapnel from a bomb that exploded on the nearby USS Tennessee, continued directing damage control efforts until his death. His courage under fire exemplified the heroism that would define America's response to this unprovoked attack. At 8:06, the USS Arizona suffered a direct hit from an 1,800-pound armor-piercing bomb that penetrated her forward magazine. The resulting explosion lifted the massive battleship's bow clear of the water before she settled back with a thunderous crash. Captain Van Valkenburg and over 1,100 of his crew perished instantly in what became the single greatest loss of life during the attack. According to records maintained by the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, the Arizona's destruction created a towering column of smoke visible from miles away, serving as a grim beacon of American vulnerability. The ship's forward magazines contained over 1 million pounds of gunpowder, and their detonation created a fireball that could be felt across the entire harbor. Japanese pilot Lieutenant Yoshiaki Irakawa dove his Aichi D3 through intense anti-aircraft fire to deliver the fatal blow to the Arizona. His bomb, converted from a naval artillery shell, penetrated multiple decks before exploding in the ship's ammunition storage. Irakawa would later describe the massive explosion as visible even through his aircraft's armored windscreen. Damage. Control parties throughout the harbor fought desperately to save their ships and shipmates. The USS California took multiple torpedo hits and began settling by the stern, while the USS Nevada attempted to escape the harbor but was forced to beach herself. To avoid blocking the channel, heroic efforts by individual sailors prevented several ships from complete destruction. The first wave's 25-minute assault had achieved devastating results, but the Japanese attack was far from over. As smoke billowed across Pearl Harbor and the first American casualties mounted, a second wave of aircraft was already approaching the Hawaiian coast. At 8:54, just as the first wave's smoke began to clear, Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki led the second wave of 171 Japanese aircraft toward Pearl Harbor. This time, however, the Americans were ready. Every available anti-aircraft gun had been manned, ammunition lockers broken open, and a deadly curtain of steel waited for the attackers. Petty Officer John Finn had already distinguished himself by manning a machine gun despite multiple wounds from strafing runs. The 27-year-old aviation ordnanceman continued firing at Japanese aircraft, even as blood flowed from shrapnel wounds across his body. His actions at Naval Air Station Kaneohe Bay would earn him the Medal of Honor and epitomize American determination under fire. The second wave concentrated on previously undamaged targets, including the naval shipyard, fuel storage tanks, and submarine base. However, their effectiveness was significantly reduced by the now alert American defenders. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky with deadly bursts, and several Japanese aircraft fell victim to increasingly accurate defensive fire. Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor and Second Lieutenant George Welch had managed to reach Haliwa Field during the first attack and successfully took off in their Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters. They became the first Americans to engage Japanese aircraft in aerial combat over Pearl Harbor, shooting down multiple enemy planes and proving that American pilots could match their adversaries' skill when given the opportunity to fight. Captain Mervyn Sharp Benyon's final moments aboard the USS West Virginia demonstrated the leadership that would carry America through the coming war. Despite mortal wounds from bomb fragments, he remained at his post directing damage control efforts until his death. His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Roscoe Hillenkoetter, would later become the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Japanese faced unexpected resistance from individual acts of heroism throughout the harbor. Seaman First Class James Ward aboard the USS Oklahoma organized rescue efforts for trapped shipmates, even as his vessel capsized. Chief Boatswain's mate Joseph George aboard the USS Vestal fought fires and flooding, while his ship was moored alongside the exploding Arizona. According to documentation from the National Archives, the second wave encountered significantly more effective resistance than anticipated. Japanese losses mounted as American gunners found their range, and aircraft maintenance crews armed every available fighter. The element of surprise was gone, replaced by American resolve and growing fury. Commander Shimazaki's bombers targeted the dry docks where the USS Pennsylvania sat in Dry Dock No. 1 alongside destroyers USS Downs and USS Cassin. A direct hit on the dry dock caused massive damage to all three vessels, but quick-thinking damage control teams prevented complete destruction. The Pennsylvania would return to service within months, her repairs becoming a symbol of American industrial resilience. Lieutenant Stephen Saltzman coordinated anti-aircraft defenses from the USS Maryland. Despite the chaos surrounding him, his organization of multiple gun crews created an effective defensive umbrella that protected several vessels from further damage. The Maryland, though damaged, remained operational and would later participate in numerous Pacific campaigns. The attack on the airfields at Wheeler Field, Hickam Field, and Ford Island destroyed nearly 200 American aircraft, most caught on the ground during peacetime conditions. However, the few pilots who managed to take off fought with desperate courage. Second Lieutenant Philip Rasmussen engaged multiple Japanese fighters in his damaged P-36 Hawk, surviving despite his aircraft being riddled with bullet holes. Japanese pilot Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi led the final bombing runs against the naval shipyard, where critical repair facilities were located. However, American damage control teams had already begun their remarkable efforts to salvage damaged vessels. The USS Nevada, though beached and heavily damaged, would eventually be refloated and returned to combat. As the second wave withdrew at approximately 10 o'clock, Pearl Harbor lay shrouded in smoke and devastation. However, the Japanese had failed to destroy the fuel storage tanks, submarine base, or ship repair facilities that would prove crucial to America's Pacific recovery. The sleeping giant was awakening. As the last Japanese aircraft disappeared over the horizon, Pearl Harbor resembled a scene from Dante's Inferno. Oil fires burned across the water's surface, creating an apocalyptic landscape where heroes emerged from the most desperate circumstances. The true character of America's fighting men revealed itself not in victory, but in the crucible of unexpected defeat. Chief Petty Officer John Finn, despite suffering 21 wounds from strafing attacks, continued manning his machine gun position at Naval Air Station Kaneohe Bay. Blood streamed down his arms as he tracked Japanese aircraft through iron sights, his determination unwavering even as medical personnel repeatedly urged him to seek treatment. His actions would later earn him the first Medal of Honor awarded for the Pearl Harbor attack. Aboard the capsizing USS Oklahoma, Seaman First Class James Ward organized rescue operations for trapped crew members. As the 31,000-ton battleship rolled over, Ward repeatedly dove beneath the rising water to reach sailors trapped in compartments below decks. His courage saved dozens of lives before he himself was overcome by exhaustion and drowning. In the ship's final moments, the USS Arizona continued burning with an intensity that could be felt hundreds of yards away. Ensign Joe Taussig Jr., son of a distinguished naval family, had both legs nearly severed by shrapnel, but continued directing rescue operations from his position on the burning deck. His leadership during those critical minutes helped save numerous wounded sailors. Before he was evacuated to medical facilities, Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua emerged as the senior surviving officer aboard the Arizona after Captain Van Valkenburg's death despite severe burns and smoke inhalation. Fuqua organized the evacuation of wounded personnel and fought fires until the ship became untenable. His Medal of Honor citation would read, "Despite severe burns and smoke inhalation, he maintained command and fought fires until forced to abandon ship." According to records preserved at the USS Arizona Memorial, over 300 sailors remained trapped within the sunken battleship's hull. Rescue teams worked frantically with cutting torches and pneumatic drills, managing to save 32 men from various compartments before the rising water, and structural damage made further rescue attempts impossible. Fireman First Class Peter Tomick aboard the USS Utah displayed extraordinary heroism by remaining at his post to ensure that boilers were properly secured as the ship capsized. His actions prevented a catastrophic explosion that could have killed dozens of additional sailors. Tomich's body was never recovered, but his Medal of Honor was presented to his widow in recognition of his ultimate sacrifice. The hospital ship USS Solace became a floating emergency room as wounded sailors were evacuated from damaged vessels throughout the harbor. Chief Pharmacist Mate William Schauf organized triage operations that saved hundreds of lives. During the chaotic hours following the attack, his medical training, combined with natural leadership abilities, proved invaluable during those desperate moments. Captain Casson Young of the USS Vestal demonstrated remarkable courage when a bomb explosion knocked him overboard. After swimming back to his ship, Young resumed command and fought fires while his vessel was moored alongside the burning Arizona. His leadership during this critical period prevented the Vestal from becoming a total loss, and she was eventually towed to safety. Second Lieutenant George Welch and Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor became the first American pilots to engage Japanese aircraft in aerial combat over Oahu. Flying Curtiss P-40 Warhawks from Haliwa Field, they shot down multiple enemy aircraft and proved that American aviators could match Japanese skill when given the opportunity to fight. Their success provided a crucial morale boost during the darkest hours. Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller aboard the USS West Virginia became one of the attack's most celebrated heroes. Despite having no formal training on anti-aircraft weapons, Miller manned a .50 caliber machine gun and engaged Japanese aircraft while helping move wounded sailors to safety. His courage broke racial barriers and earned him the Navy Cross, making him one of the first African American recipients of this high decoration. The damage control efforts throughout Pearl Harbor demonstrated American ingenuity and determination under fire. Chief Boatswain Edwin Hill of the USS Nevada single-handedly cast off mooring lines to allow his ship to get underway during the attack. Hill was killed by strafing aircraft while performing this dangerous task, but his actions enabled the Nevada to attempt an escape from the harbor. As rescue operations continued into the evening hours, the full scope of American losses became apparent. However, the heroism displayed during those terrible hours proved that the Japanese had awakened not just a sleeping giant, but a determined nation ready to fight for its survival and values. As darkness fell over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the magnitude of Japan's strategic miscalculation began to emerge from the smoke and devastation. While the attack had achieved tactical surprise and inflicted heavy casualties, it had also accomplished something Admiral Yamamoto himself had feared. It had unified the American people in righteous anger and determination for total victory. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt received the first reports of the attack. While lunching at the White House, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox telephoned with the shocking news, "Mr. President, it looks like the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt's initial disbelief quickly transformed into grim resolve. As additional reports confirmed the scope of the disaster, the president, who had struggled to prepare America for war now, faced a nation demanding immediate retaliation. The human cost of the date, which will live in infamy, was staggering. 2,403 Americans had been killed, including 68 civilians caught in the crossfire. Over 1,178 were wounded, many suffering burns and injuries that would affect them for the remainder of their lives. The USS Arizona alone accounted for over 1,100 fatalities, making it the single greatest naval disaster in American history. Admiral Kimmel and Lieutenant General Walter Short faced immediate criticism for the base's unpreparedness. Both commanders were relieved of their duties within weeks, becoming scapegoats for intelligence failures and peacetime complacency that had made the attack possible. The Roberts Commission would later investigate their conduct, though historians continued debating the fairness of their treatment decades later. The material losses appeared catastrophic at first assessment. 18 ships had been sunk or heavily damaged, including 8 battleships that formed the backbone of America's Pacific Fleet. 188 aircraft were destroyed, most caught on the ground during peacetime conditions. The Japanese had achieved their primary objective of neutralizing American naval power in the Pacific for months to come. However, critical infrastructure remained largely intact. Due to Japanese tactical decisions, the fuel storage tanks, containing over 4.5 million barrels of oil, were undamaged. The submarine base, machine shops, and dry dock facilities that would prove essential to America's Pacific recovery had been spared. Most importantly, America's aircraft carriers were at sea during the attack, preserving the naval aviation capability that would ultimately win the Pacific War. According to intelligence reports declassified by the National Security Agency, American codebreakers had been intercepting Japanese diplomatic communications for months. The famous 14-part message breaking off negotiations was decoded before the attack, but communication failures prevented this intelligence from reaching Pearl Harbor commanders in time. These intelligence breakdowns would lead to major reforms in American military communication systems. The attack galvanized American public opinion in ways that no amount of presidential rhetoric could have achieved. Isolationist sentiment, which had kept America out of the European conflict for over 2 years, evaporated overnight. Charles Lindbergh, the most prominent isolationist spokesman, immediately abandoned his opposition to American involvement in World War II. The America First Committee disbanded within days of the attack. Industrial mobilization began immediately as American factories shifted to wartime production. The automobile industry ceased civilian vehicle production and began manufacturing tanks, aircraft engines, and ammunition. Shipyards expanded rapidly to replace the vessels lost at Pearl Harbor and build the massive fleet that would carry American forces across the Pacific to victory. Japanese Admiral Yamamoto's prophetic words proved accurate. "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant," and filled him with a terrible resolve. The architect of the Pearl Harbor attack understood that Japan's only hope lay in achieving rapid victories before American industrial might could be brought to bear. The attack's success had given Japan strategic initiative, but it had also ensured that America would fight with unprecedented determination. Recruitment stations across America experienced massive increases in enlistments. Young men who had been reluctant to serve in what many viewed as a foreign war now lined up to join the military. The attack had made the war personal for every American family, creating a unified national will that would sustain the country through 4 years of global conflict. The recovery efforts at Pearl Harbor began immediately with salvage operations that would become legendary examples of American ingenuity and determination. Ships written off as total losses would be raised, repaired, and returned to service to fight in future Pacific campaigns. The weeks following Pearl Harbor witnessed one of the most remarkable recovery efforts in naval history. While America mourned its dead, and President Roosevelt prepared his day of infamy speech for Congress, teams of salvage experts, engineers, and determined sailors began the monumental task of raising the Pacific Fleet from the bottom of Pearl Harbor Captain Homer Wallen, appointed as salvage officer, faced what seemed an impossible challenge. The USS Oklahoma had completely capsized, trapping over 400 crew members inside her steel tomb. The USS Arizona burned for days, her ammunition magazines continuing to cook off. In sporadic explosions, the USS West Virginia had settled to the harbor bottom with her superstructure barely visible above the waterline. Yet Wallen and his team approached each wreck with methodical determination. The Oklahoma presented the most complex salvage operation ever attempted by the United States Navy. Engineers designed a system of massive winches and cables that could slowly roll the 31,000-ton battleship upright. The process took over 2 years and required cutting through the ship's hull to reach trapped air pockets where survivors might still be found. Tragically, the last survivor had been rescued within hours of the attack, but the methodical search continued out of respect for the missing crew members. Rear Admiral William Furlong coordinated the overall recovery effort with remarkable efficiency. Under his direction, the naval shipyard at Pearl Harbor transformed into a 24-hour operation, where damaged vessels received priority repairs. The USS Pennsylvania, damaged in dry dock during the attack, was restored to fighting condition. Within 3 months, the USS Nevada, beached to prevent her from blocking the harbor channel, was refloated and returned to service for the Normandy invasion. The most emotionally challenging recovery involved the USS Arizona. The forward sections of the battleship were completely destroyed, making salvage impossible. However, her surviving guns, armor, and equipment were carefully removed and installed on other vessels. The Arizona's bell was recovered and placed in a memorial, while her colors were retrieved and presented to the Ship's Survivors Association. According to documentation from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, the recovery operations employed over 15,000 civilian workers recruited from across the mainland United States. These skilled craftsmen worked alongside military personnel in an unprecedented collaboration that demonstrated American industrial capability under wartime conditions. Many of these workers would later transfer to shipyards on the West Coast, where they would build the vessels that carried America to victory in the Pacific. The psychological impact of the recovery effort extended far beyond Pearl Harbor itself. Newsreels showing American ships rising from the harbor bottom provided powerful symbols of national resilience. The USS California, which had settled to the bottom after taking multiple torpedo hits, was fully restored and participated in nearly every major Pacific campaign. Her return to service demonstrated that American determination could overcome even the most devastating attacks. Lieutenant Commander Edward Ellsberg, a renowned naval engineer, supervised the complex process of sealing torpedo holes and pumping out flooded compartments. His innovative techniques for underwater welding and damage assessment became standard procedures for naval salvage operations. The skills developed at Pearl Harbor would prove invaluable during future Pacific campaigns when rapid ship repairs meant the difference between victory and defeat. The human stories emerging from the recovery effort rivaled the heroism of the attack itself. Divers worked in dangerous conditions inside flooded ship compartments, searching for survivors and recovering the remains of fallen sailors. Many of these men suffered from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress, but they continued their grim duties with unwavering dedication. The USS West Virginia's restoration became a symbol of American resilience. The battleship had been considered a total loss, but naval architects discovered that her underwater protection system had prevented catastrophic structural damage. After months of painstaking repairs, she returned to service and participated in the final assault on Japan. Her crew took particular satisfaction in firing the last salvos at Japanese positions. During the war's final weeks, the success of the Pearl Harbor recovery operation established precedents for naval logistics that would serve America throughout World War II. The techniques developed for rapid ship repair, underwater welding, and damage assessment became standard procedures used in forward bases across the Pacific. The organizational methods pioneered by Captain Wallen were later employed in establishing advanced naval bases from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. As 1942 dawned, The transformation of Pearl Harbor from a scene of devastation to a symbol of American determination was nearly complete. The harbor that had witnessed America's entry into World War II was becoming the launching point for the offensive campaigns that would ultimately defeat the Japanese Empire. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress and delivered what would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Within 6 minutes, Roosevelt had transformed American sentiment from shocked bewilderment to unified determination for total victory. The congressional vote for war was nearly unanimous, with only Representative Jeannette Rankin of Montana casting a dissenting vote. Her pacifist stance, which had also led her to vote against World War I, made her the only person in American history to vote against both world wars. The overwhelming support for Roosevelt's war declaration demonstrated how completely Pearl Harbor had unified the American people behind the war effort. The strategic consequences of Admiral Yamamoto's gamble became apparent within months. Japan had achieved tactical surprise and inflicted heavy casualties, but had failed to destroy America's most valuable assets, the aircraft carriers Enterprise. Lexington and Saratoga were at sea during the attack, preserving the naval aviation capability that would prove decisive in future Pacific battles. More importantly, the attack had eliminated American isolationism and ensured that Japan would face the full industrial might of an aroused democracy. The human cost of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the immediate casualties. Families across America mourned sons, fathers, and brothers who had died in what many viewed as a treacherous sneak attack. The Sullivan brothers of Waterloo, Iowa, enlisted together after learning of the attack, ultimately serving aboard the USS Juneau, where all 5 died during the Battle of Guadalcanal. Their sacrifice epitomized the price that American families paid for victory in the Pacific. The technological lessons learned from Pearl Harbor revolutionized American military doctrine. The vulnerability of battleships to air attack validated the theories of aviation pioneers like Billy Mitchell, who had argued for decades that aircraft would dominate future naval warfare. The success of Japanese torpedo bombers led to massive increases in American naval aviation training and aircraft production. By war's end, America would operate more aircraft carriers than the rest of the world combined. The intelligence failures that made the attack possible prompted major reforms in American intelligence gathering and analysis. The establishment of centralized intelligence agencies, improved communication systems, and better coordination between military services all trace their origins to the lessons learned at Pearl Harbor. These reforms would serve America throughout the Cold War and beyond. According to historical analysis published by the Naval War College, the Pearl Harbor attack represented both Japan's greatest tactical success and its most significant strategic blunder. While the immediate military gains were substantial, the attack ensured that America would fight with unprecedented unity and determination. The isolationist sentiment that had kept America neutral in European conflicts disappeared overnight, replaced by a national commitment to total victory regardless of cost. The memorial aspects of Pearl Harbor began even before the war ended. The USS Arizona, to damage for salvage, became a war grave for the 1,177 crew members still entombed within her hull. The decision to leave her undisturbed honored the sacrifice of those who died while creating a powerful symbol of American resolve. Oil still seeps from her fuel tanks, creating what visitors call the Tears of the Arizona. The Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes trials established legal precedents regarding surprise attacks and the treatment of prisoners of war. The Pearl Harbor attack was cited as an example of aggression that violated international law, though the focus remained primarily on Japanese atrocities committed during the occupation of conquered territories. The legal framework established during these trials continues to influence international law today. The economic impact of Pearl Harbor accelerated American entry into total war production. Industries that had been reluctant to abandon profitable civilian production suddenly faced government contracts for military equipment. The attack provided political justification for massive defense spending that transformed the American economy and established the military-industrial complex that would characterize the post-war era. The social changes triggered by Pearl Harbor were equally profound. The attack created national unity that transcended regional, ethnic, and class divisions. However, it also led to the tragic internment of Japanese Americans, demonstrating how wartime fears could override constitutional protections. The contrast between American heroism at Pearl Harbor and the simultaneous violation of civil liberties illustrated the complex moral landscape of total war. Today, Pearl Harbor serves as both a memorial to those who died and a reminder of the price of unpreparedness. The attack that was intended to cripple American resolve instead awakened a sleeping giant whose response would reshape the global balance of power. From the ashes of December 7th emerged the America that would lead the free world through victory in World War II and beyond, proving that even the most devastating surprise attacks cannot destroy the spirit of a free people determined to defend their values and way of life.